And Moadim L'Simcha to everyone. Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Mem Gimel. We ended with yesterday's daf with a bit of a digression, and we're going to really digress today about this idea of different rules about how we decide which opinion do we hold by. So we ended with the story of Rabbi Yava, who was leaning on Rabbi Nachum, his shamash, and Rabbi Nachum asked him about all sorts of questions, all sorts of things. And one of the things he said to him was, if there's a Mishnah with an unattributed opinion, meaning it just appears this is the law without saying whose opinion it is, and the same issue appears in a Braita with a debate between two Tanaim, we hold by a Stam Mishnah. And that we're going to have a question. Starting at the top of Mem Gimel, Amar Le, Rabbi Nachum asked Rabbi Yavau, after Rabbi Yavau answered that, he said, after Rabbi Yavau talked about a bunch of different things, comes Rabbi Nachum and asked specifically on the one that said a Stam Mishnah and a Machloket and a Braita, what we hold by the Stam Mishnah. So he's now going to bring, and it's interesting that they bring the question in the following way. They bring a Stam Mishnah. They don't bring the Braita that disagrees with this, but there's going to be a Braita that raises the issue that there's a Machloket. And in fact, in this case, we don't hold like the Mishnah. So let's read. And then we're going to have to figure out, why is that the case? If this is the rule, then why don't we hold like this Mishnah when there's a Machloket and a Braita, and we hold in the end like one of the opinions in the Braita? So the Mishnah reads like this. And now we're going to get off into, and I have this, we're going to get into a Mishnah in Kalim. Kalim is a Masechet, a very, very long Masechet that's all about different types of utensils and whether they're Makabel Tum'ah or not, whether they become susceptible to impurity or not. I always have the sense that the rabbis in the Gemara want to get in all these issues of Tumah and Tara because there is no Gemara on it. They want to make sure that you learn a bunch of, part of the main sugyot that they think are important. So they always kind of bring in all sorts of things that don't appear in the Bavli that end up appearing in the Bavli because of all sorts of reasons. So they're going to bring a Mishnah in Kalim. V'hatnan. Masrek shel pishtan shenitlu shinav. What we're talking here is about combs. Combs that they use not for their hair, but combs to comb out either the flax or the wool. Remember, it's always tzemer ufishtim. Those are all the clothes. We talked about that not so long ago. So we have a masrek of pishtan, and then we're going to compare it to a masrek of tzemer. So a masrek is a comb of flax, and then a comb for wool. Masrek shel pishtan shenitlu shinav. If the teeth were taken out of it, meaning, right, the teeth of the comb fell out, were pulled out, the whole rules of Tumah and Tara are such that if it's a usable item, then it's called a kli. If it's a kli, then it's susceptible to impurity. Once it becomes useless, then it's not susceptible to impurity anymore. So if nitzlu shinav, you take out the teeth, as long as there's two there, that's enough to comb the flax, tmeot. It's still considered a vessel, and it's impure. Ve'echat torah, but if there was only one left, then it's not going to be usable at all. You can't comb with one tooth of the comb. So it's already not a vessel, it's pure. If you pull out the teeth and you use, right there, the tooth itself is a usable item. You could use it. Rashi points out, what can you use it for? And we'll see this in the Mishnah itself in the second part. You could use it for a candle, right? Like to fix the wick, or lemituach, or to stretch something out. There's different opinions about how you would use these, but some people say it's to stretch, the Rama says it's to stretch out rope. Some people say it's to stretch out the material, right? You stick it you take the tooth and you kind of attach the material and then you can stretch it using that. So they have some sort of purpose. It therefore is relevant, right? It can be impure. Shel tzemel, but if you have it made of wool, shenitlu shinav echat mibein tayim tahol. If there's one missing in between, like you have three teeth and you pull out one in the middle, once they're not together, it's a problem. Okay, if you have one missing in between two teeth, that's already useless. So therefore, it's tahor. Nishtayrubo shalosh b'makom echad tameh. If you have three teeth together, then it's going to be pure. You can already see there's a bit of a problem here, because if it means one is missing in between two, right? It sounds like two together would be okay, but yet this line says only three together is it going to be a useful item, and then it will be impure. If you have three together, however, one of them is the one all the way on the side. Okay, we know like when you have a regular comb for your hair, right? So normally it's thick on the sides and then you have the teeth in the middle. You don't comb your hair with the one on the sides. That's the one that's used to hold the comb. It's so thick, it's not a useful item. It's not a useful tooth of the comb. So it only means 3 in the middle, but not if we're counting the one on the outside. So if it's the one on the outside, then you need 3 more. Okay, you'll need 4 altogether. Nitzlu shtayim va'asa'an lemelaket tmeot. If you take 2 out and you make them like tweezers, right, where you use the 2 teeth together to grab something, then that will be a utensil, and that's tamei. But echad v'itchina lener o lemituach tmea. If you have only 1, then only if, and this is again different from the first part, I'm specifically pointing out all the things that are going to come up in the Gemara later, so you notice it as we're learning them. If you have 1 tooth, in the first part we said 1 tooth is fine because it's usable, right? The tooth separately is usable for all sorts of things. But when it comes to the comb for the wool, it's only if hitkina linear olamituach, you might remember this from laws of muktzah and all that kind of thing, that you can designate something. If I designate it for the purposes of using it for a candle, or, right, Rashi says lenaker taner, like to take out the wick or something, or lemituach, or to stretch, then it's impure. But only, it sounds like, if I designated it, not if I didn't designate it for anything, then it sounds like it wouldn't really be useful. So, okay, that's the Mishnah. V'kaimalan de'en halacha ka'ota Mishnah. And now they say very simply that it's a known thing that we don't paskin like this Mishnah. Okay, and like I said, the Gemara doesn't bring this, but it happens there's a Braita, there's a machloket, and we paskin like one of the opinions in the Braita. Okay, so that's why we're going to ask this question. Comes Rabbi Nachum and he says to Rabbi Abau, what are you talking about? How can you say Stam Mishnah? Machloket and Braita, we always hold like the Stam Mishnah. Here's a Stam Mishnah, and we don't hold like it. So we're going to have a pretty simple answer, which is going to take us a while to figure out what it means. Amarle bar me'ahi, bar minadahi. It's true that Stam Mishnah we always hold like, even when there's a machloket in the Braita, with all cases except for this one Mishnah. Why? To Rabbi Yochanan of Rish Lakish to Amrei Travayu Zoena Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan of Rish Lakish both said this Mishnah is not a good Mishnah. What does it mean it's not a good Mishnah? Remember, Mishnayot were passed down orally. So what they mean is it's not a good Mishnah, meaning there's a mistake in it. When they pass it down incorrectly, or at least that's what we think right now. We're going to explain it eventually a little bit differently. Today's going to be one of those days where we're going to, in all our sugiyot, we're going to have a lot of different opinions so we finally get to the right answer. So right now we're going to assume it means there's a mistake in the Mishnah. Because of that mistake, we don't hold by it. So now the Gemara obviously wants to figure out what's the mistake. Okay, you can look at the chart on the sheet and you can see we're going to have 3 answers to this. The first 2 are going to be rejected, and then we're going to end up with the third. So Amar Rav Huna bar Manoch Mishmei de Ravidi Berei de Rav Ika Mishum Dekash Reisha L'Seifa, because the first part of the Mishnah contradicts the second part. Okay, what's the first part? What's the second part? We're going to see right now. It's really not the first and the second. The first part is the flax, and the second part is the wool. But what I mean, first part and second part is within the second part, the beginning and the end of it. Okay, so within the part about the wool, there's a contradiction. Okay, and this is all the things we're going to bring up now are things I mentioned as we were learning it. It said if it's wool and you take what one is missing in between, right, 3 of them, let's say, then it's tahol. It's already useless, which would seem to imply it would seem to imply if 2 were together, it would be useful. The Hadran Tane, but then it says which sounds like only shalosh together would make it okay. Shalosh in shtayim lo. So it seems to be an inner contradiction in this Mishnah. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not a problem. My kushya dilma habagavaita habebarayata. It could be that one part which implied 2 together would be okay was talking about the inner. There's 2. Okay, according to this, there's different ways to understand it. Go with one interpretation. There's actually a nice picture of it if you have the Schottenstein, which is it's a comb that has 2 layers. Okay, it's not like a hair comb, but it's like a bigger flat piece that has on it 2 rows of teeth. Now, one row, the inner one, is used for keeping the wool in place. The outer row is used for combing it. In other words, you want to make sure the wool doesn't fall. So to make sure the wool doesn't fall, even 2 together is enough. That's the first part. The second part is referring to the outer layer, which you need the teeth for combing. And if you don't have 3 teeth together, it's not going to be able to comb the wool properly, right? That's the difference between the wool and the flax. The flax will be combed much more easily. The wool can't be, and therefore, we're going to say that's not a contradiction at all. You can say they're referring to different cases. So attempt number 2 to figure out what's wrong with this Mishnah. Now we're going to compare the first part and the second part, the part about the wool and the part about the flax. So in the part about the flax, it says, and this I pointed out as well, any teeth that come out of the comb are usable on their own, and therefore each, if you have 1 tooth, that in and of itself can be susceptible to impurity. Even though you didn't say, I'm using this for the candle, or I'm using it for stretching something, right? Even without intention, it's already usable. But in Maseifa, in the second part, in the second part, it says only if you designated it. If you didn't designate it for any use, then it's not susceptible to impurity because it really has no use. So Amar Abaye, Umay Kushya, Abaye is going to say, both Abaye and Rav Papa reject this, each for different reasons. Abaye says, I don't know why you think this is a question. Dilma, habakatayu ha below katayu. Maybe the first part where it said you don't even need to designate it was because it had a handle on it. If it has a handle on it and somewhere where you can hold it, then obviously it's useful, even without intending it to be for some purpose. The second part, when it talked about the wool, was talking about a tooth that came without anything attached, no handle whatsoever. Then it's like a toothpick almost, right? If you intend it for something, right? A toothpick is intended for use. But if you had a piece that looked like a toothpick, but you didn't intend to use it as a toothpick, only if you kind of intended it would be for some purpose, then would it be considered a vessel. Otherwise, it's just a broken thing that broke off your comb and you're not really planning to use it because it's not really useful unless you decide it's going to be useful. So that's one possibility. Or, Amrav Papa, Umay Kushya, Dilma Haba Katinata, Haba Alimata. Maybe the one that came off the flax comb was very thick. Because it was thick, it can be used without having any, right? It's already a useful item, even if you didn't intend it for anything. Whereas the one that came off the comb with the wool must have been very thin or narrow. And because of that, it's not so useful unless you decide I'll use it for something, and then it takes on purpose. So again, each one could say these might have been dealing with different things, and therefore that's not the difficulty in the Mishnah. So we tried 2 attempts to figure out what was difficult in the Mishnah, either 2 parts of the second part contradict each other, or maybe the first part against the second part. In the end, we're going to give a different reason, which actually, it's not that the Mishnah was mistaken in terms of the content. There was nothing wrong with the content of the Mishnah. But what was the problem? The problem was that the people who passed this down dropped a few words, and they're very important words for our purposes. Dafkani, the words lidayek mean to be very, to be very careful about how you pass things down. The wording of the Mishnah, they're very careful about their words. So now there were people who knew the best text of the Mishnah. They were very careful, right? Some people passed things down. They weren't so careful about the wording. The Davkani are people who are, are precise, meticulous. Everyone's helping me with words here. Okay, they were very meticulous with their words, precise with their Mishnayot. Those people actually had an ending to this Mishnah that we didn't have. What is it? Zo divrei Rabbi Shimon, and that changes everything because now it's not a Stam Mishnah. At this point, it's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. So if a Mishnah is passed down with it saying, this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, it's no longer a Stam Mishnah, and then it basically, it neutralizes our question. We no longer have a question anymore because we're going to have, by the way, the same thing later. We're going to have a whole attempt to answer a question after almost like in a whole amud, basically. We're going to try to answer some question. In the end, we're going to basically neutralize the question. So it's the same thing we're doing right now, which is we neutralize the question and we say it's not even a Stam Mishnah, and that's why. Okay, next, we're moving on now back to our topic of this waiting period. Shalach Rabbi, remember we've been talking about how many months you have to wait before getting married after a husband dies or divorces. Shalach Rabbi Chia bar Avi, ma'arsin toch shlosha. So now if you remember, there was a homachloket in the Mishnah, can be distinguished between getting engaged and getting married, right? We saw 3 different opinions. We'll get more into that in a bit. But now Rabbi Chia bar Abin says you can get engaged within 3 months. Now, he doesn't mean within 3 months meaning you don't have to wait at all. What he means is within 3 months, it's like waiting into the 6th hour, like into the 3rd month, you can already get engaged. And this is in fact what people do. Rabbi Elazar taught us in the name of Rabbi Chanina. You need, okay, so this is now what we're going to assume he meant, you need the majority of the first month, the majority of the last month, and a full month in between. Okay, this is a little bit strange because we thought you're counting from the time of the death of the husband. According to this, even though we don't hold this way, it sounds like they thought it means 3 months on the calendar, like Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. So if it happens right now, we're toward the end of Nisan, you have a little bit of Nisan, you need the whole month of Iyar and a little bit of Sivan, and already you can get engaged. He was lenient, but not that lenient. He said, you need 3 months. And interestingly, 3 months, if we go by calendar months, are 30-29, 30-29, right? So you would have, let's say, right, 60, you would end up with 89 days. So he permits on the 90th day, okay? But it's not because he counts them 30-29, 30. It's because he thinks you really need 30. You need 30 days, 30 days, 30 days. But since it's engagement, not marriage, we can be lenient. And on the 90th day, we can allow you already. Now you can see how much they get into detail, right? It's to every last thing. Wait till you see this case that happened that, because of one little day, they made a big deal. What are you talking about? He says. How do you do the counting? Right, we're in the middle of Surat HaOmer, right? It's all about counting. So here also, how do we count? How do we count the days? We don't count the day he died, and we don't count the day you get engaged. That means you need 90 days after the day of death, and only after the 90th day can you get engaged. That's what Rabban Shmuel said. So Amemar, who are you to say otherwise? So question is answered by saying, oh, you misunderstood Rabban Shmuel. He was talking about the case of the woman whose husband, she's pregnant or nursing, and he wants to marry her, and he can't marry her until she finishes nursing, 24 months. That's when he said it has to be 24 full months before she can actually get engaged. She can only get engaged the day after the 24 months are over. That's what Rabban Shmuel said. And now we're going to see it inside. To Rabban Shmuel, the Amrei Travayu, tzricha lamtin kaf daled chodesh, chutz miyom shenolabo, not counting the day of the birth, v'chutz miyom shenitar sabo, and not counting the day of the erusin, meaning she has to wait 24 full months after the birth, and only on the day after that can he actually get engaged to her. So they say, wait a minute, we have another problem. Okay, Amemar is going to say, they're going to go against Amemar. Amemar said 90th day is no problem to get engaged. So now they say, wait, here's the case I said was a crazy case. Try to imagine yourself in this situation. There was a case where somebody made an engagement party on the 90th day. Okay, they didn't wait till day 91. He basically caused their entire meal to go to waste. He basically, right, you can imagine, you're having an engagement party, Rabba walks in and says, what'd you do? You counted wrong. Night, right, sounds like Moshe when he came down from the mountain, right? You counted wrong, and sorry, I'm ending this party right now. Okay, pretty embarrassing. So what are you going to say to that? So they say, Hayisu dan yisu in Havai, right? This is classic. There was a story everybody told, but the details of it obviously got a little bit, unclear. Was it a wedding? Was it an engagement, right? So they say, thought it was engagement, right? No, it was actually a wedding that he canceled because it was on the 90th day, because nobody thinks a wedding could be on the 90th day. That for sure you have to wait 91, but a Sudat Erusin wouldn't be a problem. That's what Amemar says. The Hilchata, what's the halacha on this? The Gemara tells us, in the end, we hold that you have to wait both for the case where the woman's nursing and only get engaged after that. The date of the engagement is not included in the count. Likewise, for this 90 days, you have to wait the day. You can't get engaged on the 90th day. Now we're going to have one topic from here till the end of today's daf, other than the Mishnah, which is at the end, which we'll probably learn in tomorrow. But now we're going to start with this opinion of Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah. So before we start, I want to remind you of the Mishnah. So let's read it inside. You can either look back on Mem Aleph Amud Bet. It's also in the I put it on the sheet using the sheet. So Tanakama holds, Yevamot lo tachlot v'lo tityabem ad sheyesh la shelsha chodeshim. Or you have to wait 3 months, no matter what, for the Yevamot and ken kol shal nashim lo yitarsu v'lo yinasu ad sheyulem shelsha chodeshim. You need 3 months for everything. Rabbi Yehuda says, hanisuot yitarsu v'arusot yinasu. Remember, he says both directions. If you were engaged, you can get, right, just betrothed, you could get married. If you were married, you can get betrothed, no problem. Other than the Arusot and Yehuda, we're not going to get into that, right? Exception to the rule. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol anashim yitarsu. He seems to be relating to one part of what Rabbi Yehuda said, which is all women who were married or even engaged, obviously, can get betrothed, engaged. Other than the almanah, he points out, because a widow cannot, now, according to this, what can't she do? And this is going to be the whole question. She can't get betrothed, right? She can't get engaged. Why? Because she's supposed to be sad. Okay, this whole thing about this law about ibul for an almanah, it's the topic of Daf Michelle Farber this week in Hebrew, if you want to listen. In any case, we're going to focus on these words of Rabbi Yossi. So now the Gemara says, Chutz min almanah. So Amar Rav Chisda. Chisda says, wait, there's a problem. Rabbi Yossi is basically saying, widows cannot get engaged because it negates their mourning period, right? It goes against mourning, rules of mourning. So Rav Chisda says, wait a minute, where else do we know laws of mourning? From Tisha B'Av. So let's look at the days preceding Tisha B'Av. Remember, there's all these laws, and we learned it in Ta'anit, that there's all different, right? Nowadays, there's the 3 weeks, there's the 9 days, there's the week of Tisha B'Av, Shavua Shechalbo. There's Sephardim who don't hold by most of those things, and really only hold by Shavua Shechalbo, or maybe the 9 days, different customs. Anyway, it all came from Masechet Ta'anit, and let's read some of them. So Rav Chisda says, I'm going to make a kal v'chomer. One of the things you can't do when you're in Avelut, for Tisha B'Av, right, the days leading up to Tisha B'Av, is you can't do laundry. Okay, so here they're going to say, kal v'chomer. Rav Chisda says, I can make an easy kal v'chomer to prove that there's no problem with a widow getting engaged. How so? When it's forbidden to do laundry before Tisha B'Av, and yet it's permitted to get engaged. Now we're going to have to see where this all comes out. So if it's permitted to do laundry, which nobody tells the widow you can't do laundry for 3 months, right? That would be kind of difficult. Yet she could get engaged. How could that possibly, right? And therefore, how could she not get engaged? And that's if normally when you can't do laundry at the days before Tisha B'Av, and yet you can get engaged, which we're going to see in a minute where we see that. Therefore, in the days when a widow can do laundry, she should definitely be able to get engaged. So, Eino Din, right? So, Makom shemutar lechabes, when she's a widow, Eino Din, is it not obvious shemutar le'ares that she can get engaged? So, Maihi, where do we see this? Titzanan, it says in the Mishnah, in Ta'anit, Shabbat shachal tisha b'av b'tocha, asur l'saper lechabes. The week, Shabbat doesn't mean Shabbat, it means the week of Tisha B'Av. You can't get haircuts, you can't launder your clothes. Uba chamishim mutar mipnei kvod Shabbat. On Thursday, you're allowed to because of Shabbat. Vitanya, and there's a brayta there that says, Kodem azman hazeh mimatin be'iskehem. Before that time, you have to limit how much work you do. Milisal militain, you can't do business dealings. Milivnot ulintoa, building and planting. Uma arsim, but you can get engaged. Avalo konsim, you just don't get married, but you can get engaged. So here you see, you're allowed to get engaged at a time when you can't do laundry. Ve'eno sin sudare usim. You can get engaged, you just can't make a party. Okay, so now, so there's a very easy answer to this, which is, Kitanya hi kodem de kodem. You weren't paying attention. The first thing talked about the week before Tisha B'Av, you can't do laundry. Notice this said before that, right? There's some sort of time period, which is unclear exactly what, but there's some sort of time period before that where you can get engaged. You just can't do business dealings. But notice laundry is not listed here. So your kal v'chomer, right, is a bit weak. Okay, so that's what they're going to say. They knock out his kal v'chomer and they say, but that's talking about the time period before where you can actually do laundry. So you can't make a kal v'chomer when you can't do laundry you can get engaged, and therefore here you can do laundry. Of course, you can get engaged because it's not clear that you can't do laundry in that earlier period. But in any case, Amarava, he's going to say basically, but I can give you a different kal v'chomer. If you're talking about the earlier time period where maybe you can do laundry, but look, they could still make a kal v'chomer argument, and this is going to be our big question. You can't do business dealings, and yet you can get engaged. So again, nobody told the widow you can't do business dealings during this time period. So that's not forbidden. So shouldn't you be able to get engaged? Because here again, it says you can't do business dealings and yet get engaged before Tisha B'Av. And by her, she can do business dealings. So obviously she should be allowed to get engaged. So because of that, we're going to have to try to change what Rabbi Yossi says. Okay, I'll give you the structure, which is we're going to start suggesting amending the text. Okay, again, we have a lot of repetition, even though the first sugya had nothing to do with this sugya, the structure is very similar. We're going to have attempts to change the text and say the text is a bit wrong, like we said in the beginning, right? That Mishnah maybe had a wrong text. In the end, they're going to actually say there was no problem with the text of the Mishnah, just like we did in the previous sugya. But what they're going to do is they're going to distinguish, and this is the obvious answer, which you wonder why the Gemara didn't do it in the first place, which is they're going to say there's a difference between Avelut of Tisha B'Av and Avelut when your husband dies. It's not the same. Okay, that's going to be the very bottom line of our sugya, but it's going to take us a while to get there. We still have a whole amud until we get there. So the Gemara is going to attempt several changes to Rabbi Yossi to change what he actually says, but each time we're going to have some issues with it. So what we basically are struggling with is if his topic is engagement, which it was, right? He says, Kol hanashim yidarsu. All women can get engaged, betrothed, other than the widow because she's in mourning. And our whole problem is a widow in mourning should be allowed to get betrothed, just not married. So we have to change it to a case where Rabbi Yossi is actually talking about marriage and not engagement. So, lo tema de Rabbi Yossi omer, kol anashim yidarsu, ela ema kol anashim yinasu. Change the words. It's not all women can get married, can get engaged. All women can get married. Okay, so now that's very different than we understood Rabbi Yossi. According to this, Rabbi Yossi isn't partially agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda. He's disagreeing with everybody until now. And he's basically saying all women can get married immediately. There's no waiting time period. The only waiting time period has to do with a woman who's a widow who needs to be in mourning and therefore can't get married right away. So the Gemara asks, Rabbi Yossi lavchin, what you're saying Rabbi Yossi has no issue whatsoever of this 90 days we've been discussing all along? So one option is to say, yeah, late. In fact, he doesn't have this issue. Okay, that's one possibility. But it's not a great possibility, and therefore we're going to move on and suggest a different one. Okay, we're now at the top of Amud Bet, second line. Some people say lo olam ilay. Really, he holds this 90-day period. So what does it mean? So we have to change it a little bit to something else. Again, we want to make the topic marriage. So how can we say who can get married? Not anyone can get married, but remember, Rabbi Yehuda talked about two different things. Women who were married can get engaged. That's what we thought that Rabbi Yossi was agreeing with, other than the widow. But he also said women who were betrothed before, engaged beforehand, can get married because, again, there's no concern that they're pregnant from the previous husband. So maybe that's what Rabbi Yossi is talking about. And now we're going to read it like this. Ema Rabbi Yossi Omer, suggests that Rabbi Yossi says, Kol arusot grushot yinasu. All engaged women, but not all, only ones who were divorced, because again, it's either divorced or widowed. Widowed, he's going to exclude. So when he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that kol arusot yinasu, anyone who was betrothed can get married, only though if they're divorced and not if they're widowed. Because if they're widowed, they have a separate problem, right? It's not that we're worried about who the father of the child is. It's that they're supposed to be mourning. And then we resolve the whole issue of erusin because it's not talking about engagement. It's talking about marriage. And marriage, also in Tisha B'Av, right? The days before Tisha B'Av was forbidden. And it's also forbidden here. And then everything matches up other than the fact that we have to change the wording of the Mishnah. Okay, which is, again, it's a little bit bothersome to change the words on the Mishnah. On the other hand, we know that it happens all the time. So now they say, but Rabbi Yehuda, but then he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Well, not 100%, but he mostly agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. So they say, no, well, if he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda on one issue, not the other, right? He doesn't agree that a married woman can get engaged, right? If she was married before and divorced, he doesn't think she can get engaged. He just thinks that a woman who was betrothed before can actually get married. He doesn't say the second part of Rabbi, or I don't remember, it was the first part, right? He doesn't say the first part of Rabbi Yehuda, the Nisuot Yitarsu. Okay, if you were married before, you can get betrothed according to Rabbi Yehuda. He doesn't think so. Because again, that resolves it, because then the whole topic of Rabbi Yossi is not Erusin, it's Nisuin. Okay? And then, but it's Nisuin from who? It's Nisuin from people who are engaged. So again, let's read it inside. So Rabbi Yehuda holds Nisua Muteret Le'aves. He says if you were married before, you can actually get engaged now, because we're not worried you're going to get pregnant from the second husband. For Rabbi Yossi Savar Nisua Asura Le'aves. A married woman can't get betrothed. V'Savar Rabbi Yossi Nisua Asura Le'aves. But wait, it sounds like a very nice answer. Okay, again, you had to change the wording, and instead of saying he says Kol Hanashim Yitarsu, you would have to mean anyone who's engaged could get married, rather than the subject seemed to be engaged, right? The verb there. But no, it's not the verb. That's describing the women. They're engaged women. They can get married. But what's the problem? According to this, Rabbi Yossi holds that in Nisu'ah, if you were married, you actually can't get engaged unless you wait the 30 days. Tanya, but doesn't it say in a Braita? Rabbi Yossi Omer, this is going to be very similar to our Mishnah. Okay, so far that's exactly the wording that appeared in our Mishnah. V'kama ibul shela, how long is her ibul? 30 yom, okay, 30 days. V'kulan lo yinasu ad shulem 3 chodashim. Now here it seems very clear. The first part was talking about getting engaged, and the second part was talking about getting married. Okay, you see that? So again, that would make it very difficult to say that the first part was talking about marriage also. Okay, and that's what we're going to say right now. Hi, my kushya. So first they say, I don't understand why you think this rejects Rabbi Yossi. Is it because of the first line? And therefore you have to say the verb he's using is engagement, not marriage. Well, that's not a problem, because our Mishnah said the exact same thing, and we changed our Mishnah. We'll change the Braita as well. Is this the wording of the Braita is any stronger than a Mishnah? Of course not, right? If anything, the wording of a Mishnah should be more legitimate than the wording of a Braita, because Mishnah, we're always taken more seriously. And if already we're going to change the wording of the Mishnah, we can definitely change the wording of the Braita. Right, so again, is this any stronger than our Mishnah to Ukina that we already said it's about Arusoku Sho Yinasu? The words Kol Anashim Yitarsu don't really mean all women can get engaged. It means all women who were engaged could get married. So that can't really be the problem. But what's the problem? But then it says no one can get married until they wait the 3 months. In Subehu Delo, Shapir Dami. From this, it seems to imply no women can get married within 3 months, which seems to imply, but they could get engaged. So the assumption from the second part of the Mishnah, not to mention what I said before, which is the second part is talking about marriage. It must have been the first part was talking about engagement. So that seems to raise a bit of a problem with this reading. That Braita is a problem, because that Braita basically tells us that Rabbi Yossi seems to say that women could get engaged, which again is back to the simple reading of our Mishnah, which goes back to what about Tisha B'Av, right? Why in Tisha B'Av can you get engaged and you can't when you're in Avelu for your husband? So Rava, now this is all raised from this new Braita. So Rava is going to reread the new Braita in a way that it won't raise a question. Rava taritz ve'emahachi. Read the Braita like this. Rabbi Yossi Omer, kol arusot grushot yinasu, chutz min ha'almana mipnei ha'ibul. So again, Rabbi Yossi says all betrothed women can get married. Okay? Again, once we do this, we resolve the marriage problem. We resolve the engagement problem. It's all about marriage. Engagement is totally fine, even for a widow. Because once we switch the subject to marriage, we basically neutralize the Erusin question, engagement. So again, we're going to have to read the whole thing, though, because we had a problem with the Sefer, the second part. So again, so again, if you're divorced and you were only betrothed to your first husband, you can get remarried because there's no concern you have a child from the first husband. But if you were widowed, we don't allow you because of laws of mourning. How much is that 30 days? We're just rereading the Braita now. What's this last line then that we have problems with? Right? We read it as this simple reading. Sorry, I just want to read it. V'kulan lo yinasu Ad shulem shlosha chodeshim, right? Which we said that sounds like they can't get married, but they could get betrothed. So now we're going to change it again to say not yinasu, but yitarsu. Unisuot lo yitarsu ad shulem shlosha chodeshim. But married women, right? Until then, we were talking about women who were betrothed from the first marriage. Now we're saying, but if you were married, we're switching the marriage subject of that line to married from before, just like we switched the engaged verb to, oh, you were engaged before. So likewise, we're going to switch this line. If you were married before, then you even have to wait for engagement until 3 months. And then that matches perfectly with what Rabbi Yossi said, because then he doesn't permit any kind of engagement. Okay? Now, what's the problem here, though? This all means that the subject of the almana, the widow who has to wait 3 months, we're talking now about what kind of widow. We want to say they can't get, right? If they were engaged from the first marriage and then divorced, they could get married right away, because it would have to be they were engaged. If we're talking about the subject is, the verb is, can they get married? But a widow can't get married if she was engaged to her first husband and widowed from him. But that's not true, okay? Because we're going to learn that if you're only betrothed and you were never actually married to him, the laws of avelut are different, okay? You don't have rules of avelut, which means you can obviously go get married right away because you're not part of avelut because you weren't actually married to him. You were only betrothed to him. So then that's going to reject this whole new reading. We can't read it that way. So we're now bringing a different problem. I forget about the Braita and how we read the Braita, but this whole halacha, according to this, doesn't make any sense because it's all premised on the fact that we're talking about a woman who was betrothed before and now became widowed or divorced. Again, if she's divorced, we don't have to worry. She had a child from the first husband because they weren't living together. If she was engaged, though, she'd have to wait. If she was widowed, she'd have to wait the 30 days because 90 days because she's in mourning, but she's not in mourning. We're going to see that right now. There is no mourning for a widow from a betrothed marriage, right? Because she wasn't actually married. A betrothal is not a marriage. How do we know this? Vatani Rabbi Chia bar Ami, he brings a braita that says, first we're going to start with the man. Ishto arusa, his wife he's betrothed to his wife, and she dies. Lo onein, laws of onein don't apply. What we mean by onein here is the laws that you can't eat sacrificial meat or sacrificial items, kodshim, any kind of sanctified items when you're in onein. That doesn't apply to you if your wife dies from engagement. V'lo mitamela, okay, which we're going to assume right now, although we'll explain in another minute differently. But usually when it says lo mitamela, it means if you're a Kohen, you can't become impure to her because you can only become, right? It says l'she'ero karov elav. If it's his wife, she wasn't his wife. V'chein hi, also she, lo onenet v'lo mitamelo. If he dies, laws of onein don't apply to her. Okay, and this is important for our purposes. And lo mitamela. Now, what does it mean, lo mitamela? Lo mitamalo. She doesn't become tameh to him. What does that mean? There's no laws of a bat kohen can become impure to anyone she wants. What it means here, it must mean lo mitama means not what we thought before. It's only a kohen. Then a kohen can't become impure. This means she's not responsible for his burial. In other words, the closest relatives are the ones responsible for the burial. She's not responsible for the burial because she's not mourning him, right? She wouldn't sit shiva, all rules like that. So what do you see here? Mourning does not apply to widows from engagement. So you can't say that Rabbi Yossi's whole subject was widows from engagement and divorcees from engagement because that's not even a law. There is no mourning. Okay, we're going to continue in this braita for one more minute. Meta eino yorsha. If she dies, he doesn't inherit her property because they're only engaged. And metu govek ktubata. If he were to die, she can get her ktuba money because the ktuba money is even from engagement. So we basically rejected our rereading. Okay, we had two possible rereadings of the braita, right? One was that he doesn't hold by this law of distinction at all, okay? And he just doesn't have it, right? That was kol anashim yinasu. Any women can get married. That was one attempt. The other was kol arusot grushot yinasu, but then it would mean it's only talking about women from engagement, and then it wouldn't apply to the almanah. So a different type of answer, instead of rereading it, we're going to just suggest a better way to answer it is to say, Ela Tanahi, The Mishnah we saw in Tani was one opinion, but there's a different opinion that disagrees. Tanya, as we see in a Braita, Me Rosh Chodesh Adatani. This would have been a much simpler answer. I don't know why they didn't start with this. Wait till you get to an even simpler answer. But this one, okay, we're going to have two more answers to this question. And with that, we'll end our daf, which is number one, Me Rosh Chodesh Ad Hatanit, from Rosh Chodesh until the fast. This is the 9 days. Ha'amim atim is kehen. They limit their business dealings. Milisal militem, right? To have business dealings, selling things. Milivnot vilintoa, building and planting. Umiliares umilisa, and to get engaged or to get married. What do you see here? They don't get engaged either. So here you see a Tanaitic opinion that would fit perfectly with Rabbi Yossi. He was talking about Erusin. And he says they don't get engaged. Well, we don't have to worry. What about in the days preceding Tisha B'Av, where we can get engaged, right? And yet we can't do laundry. And here we can do laundry and yet can't get engaged, which doesn't make any sense. Oh, according to this opinion, you can't get engaged either. Of course, you can't get married, but you also can't get engaged. And therefore, Rabbi Yossi is going to hold by this Tana and not by the Tana in the Mishnah in Tani. Continuing in that, right? Shabbat, right? And then the week of Tisha B'Av, you already can't cut your hair and you can't do laundry. Okay, the truth is it wasn't really the laundry question. It was the business dealings question, because we already rejected the laundry question because they're different time periods. But even though the business dealings goes together with no engagement. So with the woman, we could say, well, she can still do business dealings, but she can't get engaged. That matches perfectly the mourning period before Tisha B'Av. Okay, and it doesn't match perfectly. It matches at least with the Erusin part matches. Some people say, with the whole month of Av, you can't do dealings. We saw this when we learned Masechet Tani. That sounds like a pretty good answer. Okay, so we don't question Rabbi Yossi from the Mishnah because there's a different Braita and he holds by that opinion. Right? You can always, if you have a different Tana that you can hold by, it makes sense. But Matzkefla Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi now comes and attacks this opinion as well. Mimai de le'ares mamash. When it says that you can't get engaged, maybe it means you can't have an engagement party, right? Some people, okay, again, engagement then didn't mean engagement now, but let's just give it our engagement as an example. Some people get engaged and immediately that night they invite people over, they have a party to celebrate. Some people get engaged and, do a party at some point later. So what they were talking about here is on the days preceding Tisha B'Av, you can't have a party for Erusin, but you can actually get engaged. This is a halacha, by the way. You can get engaged during the 3 weeks, okay? Again, our engagement isn't this kind of engagement, so it's an easier way to do it. But the halacha talks about even Erusin, real Erusin, you can do because we're worried that maybe someone else will grab the woman and, we want to let you have your chance at her before someone else decides to betroth her. So we allow it. So he says, when it says you can't do Erusin in this Braita, it might not mean you can't get betrothed. It might mean you can get betrothed. You just can't have a party, a celebration. So then they question Rav Ashi's question and they say, Ihachi. So if you're going to say that the subject, when it says Asur le'ares, means you can't have a party, well, then you could say the same thing about Nisuin. So you could say, Ihachi milisa nami, l'me'amad sudan Nisuin hudasu, halisa shapridami. Maybe you could actually get engaged without having a wedding party. Now you might say, what a crazy thing. I told you I had this wedding in my house last week. It was exactly that. We didn't have a suda. We put a little food, but barely. It was a wedding ceremony without the Erusin, without the party element to it. And here you're going to see what they're going to say. So he says, no, you can't compare wedding without a party to betrothal without a party. Why? He says, when there's nisuin, a wedding celebration without a big festive meal, it's still a very happy occasion. That's why I brought this example of my wedding. It was a super happy wedding, even though there wasn't really food, right? It goes against all our Judaism. You have to have food. I mean, again, we did have a little bit of food, but it certainly wasn't a suda. So that you can still have simcha. But erusin below suda miika simcha. But erusin is just the early stage. It's not the same kind of simcha as nisuin. That wouldn't be anything without a suda. And therefore, again, we're going to assume that maybe we go back to Rav Ashi's question. Maybe that was a wedding without a meal. That was a sudat erusin, and that's why it's forbidden. But erusin would actually be permitted, which goes back to our original question. So now we're going to end with El Amar Rav Ashi, the final answer. Shane avelut chadasha me avelut yeshana, v'shane avelut derabim me avelut yachid. We're going to make, and this was the obvious answer from the beginning. You can't compare the morning of Tisha B'Av to the morning of a woman who loses her husband. There's no comparison, right? Number one, the morning of Tisha B'Av, we're mourning something that happened so long ago. There's a limit to, right, how much of a we're going to put upon you, right? So there we can say Erusin is permitted. But when it comes to a person, right, your own personal avilut that happened right now. So number one, it's right now. We're going to be more strict about your rules. And number two, there's a difference between something the community is mourning and something you as an individual are mourning. You as an individual mourning something that's very personal to you is going to be much more severe than something that the community is mourning. And therefore, there's, again, like I told you before, we're going to basically neutralize the question. There is no question. You can't compare laws of a widow to laws of mourning for Tisha B'Av. Totally different thing. And therefore, there's basically no question, which basically we could have answered a whole amud ago. We would have had a much shorter daf. But we ended up with this, and I guess it would have been other things in the daf if not this. And we will pick up from the Mishnah in tomorrow's Shiur. Meet up then. Moadim Simcha to everybody.